we're seeing the value of legacy media players because legacy, in many cases, and I think certainly in our case, means trust, and trust is valuable and rare.
Hello everybody, welcome to Media Voices. If you've never listened to us before, we take a look at everything that's going on in the media world over the past week and condense it down to one or two main stories that are the most important for you. I'm Chris Sutcliffe.
I'm Esther Thorpe.
And I'm Peter Houston. And that extract you just heard is from my interview with Edward Felsenthal, Editor-in-Chief and CEO at Time magazine, and as you might have seen, Time was 100 years old last week. I took the chance to speak to Edward about how the publication made it to its centenary. We spoke about tradition of innovation at Time, trust, and how legacy is not a bad word in magazines.
Another important word is trust. And this week we're doing a sort of a proxy look at how trust in the media has evolved over the past couple of days in the UK after some revelations around the Telegraph, Isabel Oakeshott, and Matt Hancock. Now, Esther, you want to put this in a little bit of context for people who your face who don't live in the UK. Well, you feel like we should.
Yeah, it would be kind of weird not to talk about it. So, Matt Hancock, how do we describe Matt Hancock?
Absolute
So he was the health secretary for a lot of the pandemic. So he did have to step down because he went on I'm a Celebrity.
No. He had to step down before that. He was caught canoodling.
I knew you were going to say canoodling.
So he's a current MP.
I thought you were going to say something else there.
So he last year he asked Isabel Oakeshott to write a book. It was a sort of semi-autobiography that she wrote for him. And as part of the material for that, this was supposed to rehabilitate his image. He gave her all of his WhatsApp communications to do with the pandemic. So it was about 100,000 messages. So she wrote the book that was published late last year. If you haven't heard of it, that's not a surprise, nor would we.
You can pick it up for about 50 pence in the works.
One of many books written by or about Tory MPs over the past couple of years that have just come and gone and vanished and just seem to be purely there to keep people in their orbit employed as ghostwriters.
Pre these leaks, it had sold about 4,000 copies.
Really?
Yeah. So if you don't know who Isabel Oakeshott is, I didn't realise she was behind a lot of this stuff until all this has come out. So she's a pro-Brexit political journalist. She's worked at places like the Sunday Times, Daily Mail. So she was one of the ones that worked on David Cameron's biography that featured the dead pig head accusation, which I'm just going to leave there.
She's a class act, isn't she, really? She's a proper class act.
She wrote Bad Boys of Brexit on behalf of Aaron Banks, which is his account of the EU referendum. She then leaked some of his emails and texts admitting he'd had far more dealings with the Russian officials than he'd admitted. So we're going to start to see a pattern with the leaks. She then also leaked in a series of articles she wrote. She leaked some communications the UK ambassador to the US had Sir Kim Darroch, where he described the Trump presidency as inept and utterly dysfunctional. He was forced to resign over that a couple of years ago. And Matt Hancock decided that she would be the perfect person to trust with 100,000 WhatsApp messages about an incredibly sensitive time. So were we at all surprised when she decided she was going to publish all of these WhatsApp messages?
No.
Apparently, yeah, we weren't. Apparently Matt Hancock was. Now, to get back to the business of media and kind of the raison d'etre of Media Voices, what has been the fallout from this? Because I have seen such a wide variety of responses. People have lauded her. People have said, actually, there is a public interest case for having leaked these. People have gone, actually, this is terrible, awful behavior for a journalist or, nominal journalist to burn a source so thoroughly. From, I suppose, the Telegraph's point of view, there's a question of, to what extent are they now culpable for withholding information? Because obviously it was the Telegraph which she went to with this, despite working for other news outlets.
So she co-anchors Talk TV, and she also writes for The Sun as part of this. It's a sort of freelance retainer deal. So she wasn't technically under any obligation to go to them first. But my goodness me,
walking in the
management,
office the next
I think,
day
is furious.
So the question we have here is, it's almost like an Alien versus Predator situation where we're stuck in the middle between these two opposing forces. The difference, of course, is that aliens and predators are quite cool, and these people are just the most grey, boring, worst individuals. They just happen to be powerful.
Also, they have ethics in a way that these guys don't.
Do we think this is going to move the needle on public trust in the media? Because we write about this all the time.
In the wrong direction, yeah.
Well, is it? So do you think that this is now going to have a negative impact on how people believe, how people think of the press?
I think how you approach this story probably depends on where you start. If you start on the left, you're thinking, oh my God, these people are at it again. You can't trust any of them. And it just proves that the UK press is just a cesspit. I think if you're on the right, you maybe see her as a kind of freedom fighter,
a Robin Hood figure,
standing up for public. I can't even think.
I don't know if it's left and right though, because it's the kind of the lockdown. The opinions on lockdown really vary across the spectrum. And it seems to be like if you were pro lockdown, then this is like a lot of this is really quite horrendous. And if you were anti lockdown, she's the freedom fighter for this.
Okay, so one of the things that I think has come out, which is relevant to this discussion, is the series of text messages between Matt Hancock and then editor of the Evening Standard, George Osborne, Worky, if you want to refer to him by his nickname there, because he was less used than a work experience person. Now Matt Hancock wanted to hit his target for testing and basically said to George Osborne, can you give me a hand? And Osborne came back and said, absolutely, don't worry about this. Now, he didn't give him the splash, but it raised this spectre of this revolving door between government and editors at major papers in the UK. So again, I do think that if you're looking for confirmation that this is bad for trust in the press, you're going to find it there. But at the same time, I've seen people come to Oakeshot's defense and say, well, actually, no, this is exactly what journalists should be doing. This is holding power to account.
Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Yeah, exactly. I hate everybody involved in the story with the fury of 1,000 suns. But we have to admit that there is some nuance to this story. And what I'm going to ask the two of you now is, do we think there's going to be any fallout for this for the press, or is it purely going to be for the people involved, say Hancock?
Yeah, no fallout for the press whatsoever.
I think we might look back in a couple of months at how a lot of this has come out, because it's not. I think everybody's so desperate to find sort of the heroes and villains in this story. I think it's much more complicated than that, and the decisions the government made at the time, whether you agree with them or not, were complicated, and it's. I mean, the communications that come out are not great.
I was going to say, that's not the point. Everyone with a brain accepts that they were complicated decisions. It's the infighting and the backstabbing.
But I think that's being overshadowed, and a lot of what's coming out now is almost undermining the decisions that they made at the time, even though it shouldn't be. Like, we couldn't realistically have lockdowns raised until we'd got the vaccine. But the way that they've discussed some of those Christmas restrictions and a lot of things going on, and I want to prioritise the economy above people like old people because they're just as likely to die falling down the stairs. Like, there's so much that's come out on both sides of anti or pro lockdown that has just really shed quite an ugly light on the decisions that were made during that time. And I think that's where, the Telegraph is anti-lockdown. That they are picking and choosing the messages they publish, and that is quite important.
We were talking about this ahead of recording. Yeah, we were saying they have a responsibility now to make sure that if they are committed to transparency, as they have said around this, then they need to release everything and put it in context. Oh, Peter,
committed to transparency? You shitting me?
Peter, I'm trying to play devil's advocate.
But this is so. Also, I think for people that don't know, there's a big public inquiry going on into this, and all the messages were handed over to the public inquiry prior to Isabel Oakeshott choosing to publish them. She published them because she didn't believe the public inquiry would be quick enough.
Bollocks! Bollocks! She did.
That's what she said.
She published them because she knew she'd get in front of the front page of the Telegraph and on the TV and all sorts and make
That's
loads
what she
of money.
said.
Oh, so why did she hold on to them for so long? Why hold on to them for so long? Why do it now?
Peter, I'm agreeing with you that she has form for this kind of stuff.
And the other thing in terms of In terms of press, so you were mentioning about George Osborne, who was...
Worky.
Yeah. So Emily Sheffield, who is, I think she's the current editor of the Evening Standard.
Oh, she's not there, no.
Was.
No, she's left,
she was
yeah.
former editor. So she was certainly quite high up there at the time. She tweeted about this when the messages came out about Matt Hancock wanting to pressure George Osborne into putting himself on the front pages. And she said, I just want to gently point out that Osborne was not editor on November 2020, the date of these particular WhatsApp. He had no editorial control over the newspaper at that point. Okay. He was editor-in-chief, an advisory role and columnist.
Oh, great defense. Great defense, Emily. Then why did Hancock text him and why did he say yes?
But even if that's true, so even if that is a valid point, Christopher, what's her relationship with a certain person?
Well, now I believe that she is the sister-in-law of ex-Prime Minister David Cameron.
Interesting.
My point there is actually more around the public perception of job titles. I'd have said editor-in-chief had editorial control over a newspaper, and I work in the industry, so does there need to be some clarification there? And the other thing, I think a lot of people within the industry assume that everybody outside the industry knows what public interest is or why you would break an NDA over it and what an NDA is. And the sort of conversation with sort of quote normal people, or certainly people I've chatted to about this that aren't industry, is that they're a bit like, well, if she'd promised, like if she'd signed a legal document saying she wouldn't disclose it, why did she? And it just seems to paint this whole picture of like, you can't trust journalists. Like what are we, like the fourth least trusted professional, something just above politicians? Well, this isn't doing anything to reinforce that.
Absolutely not. And this has come to light as well with, for instance, lately things like the Nicola Bulley story, where the press behaved in a way that was, some titles behaved abominably. And you can defend death knocks, you can defend all this all you like. But the reality is that at the moment, with trust being so low, you have to be above board in every single way. You have to be totally watertight. It's the Caesar's wife situation.
Yeah, but that's why I say there'll be no fallout, because for the public, that's just business as usual.
That's depressing.
We're already there.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, sometimes the rock bottom is, at least you're building on rock.
Yeah, exactly. Foundations are good. I think that part of the issue of this is the adversarial nature of the UK press in that sense. And okay, it's predominantly right-leaning, and they're just going to go at each other for this. So that adversarial approach, there's no ethics code. I mean, there is an ethics code, but no one seems to be paying much attention to it. And I just think people have got to be looking in from the outside thinking, what is going on? And it's the same thing with the government. Well, they're all worried about their careers. What comes out of this is they're all just self-seeking bastards.
I think that the only conclusion we can draw here is that A, we didn't want to talk about this to begin with, but then B, there is so much still to be done to rebuild that trust in the media, and stuff like this, whether it is, if it devolves to Esther's point into a kind of he said, she said situation, then we're all getting tarred with the same brush. And that's not good for anybody. What was the equivalent recently in the US where I think it was somebody on Fox got access to a whole load
it was Fox publicly was sort of supporting the election fraud claims, but in private they had seen. I don't know. Was it right? Was it the Dominion stuff?
It was. This is different. This is a different thing than what I was talking about. That's a completely separate trust crisis. You're then talking about this idea that all the information that's come out about the Dominion voting scandal was, in fact, the higher ups at Fox, including Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch, knew that was all bullshit, but they instructed their anchors to continue promoting that because they didn't want to lose viewers to Newsmax, to all these different places.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of finish off with illustrating a point about this, there's been some stuff just over the weekend about Matt Hancock saying that he was ready to deploy the new variant over Christmas in the run up to Christmas 2020. Which is when we were entering like lockdown 3. That's just before my daughter was born. There was scientifically, there was another variant going round, and the language he used has just been taken with by the conspiracy theorists and run with. And news outlets don't have a responsibility to take what he's saying and remind people that there was another variant circulating, and that just because the government are verbalizing it in a way that really feeds the conspiracy theories doesn't negate the fact that there was scientifically a new variant coming up.
If you are the Telegraph and you just turned on this fire hose to the extent they have and are just blasting it out there, that responsibility for who gets soaked is on you. You have to provide it in context. And that's
I mean,
your responsibility as a paper.
Goodness knows what else we've got to come out, because, you're not going to start with the best stuff, are you? And we're like, what, 3-4 days into this?
God. Now on to the news in brief, and I am aware that the tonal shift here is going to be incredibly jarring. But the best piece I read this week, and one that neither of my co-hosts read, I believe, because they're dork-ass losers who hate fun, is all about video game journalism. And so for Nyman Lab, Luke Winkie has posed the question, given that gaming is the most lucrative entertainment medium in the world, why are we consistently seeing job cuts in games journalism? So if you think back over the past couple of years, it has consistently been game-focused sites, game-focused publications that have borne the brunt of a lot of job cuts. But it's effectively a microcosm, I think, of what we've seen elsewhere, which is that as games and gaming influencers, as game developers and publishers get access to audiences directly, the need for gaming magazines as gatekeepers, as they once were, has ended. There is absolutely still space for games journalism. It just requires you to do it in a different way. This is, I suppose, this could be the bellwether for how we think about magazines in the future.
This is what Josh Nino was talking about, the Dexerto co-founder, a couple of weeks ago to you, wasn't he? Because he was basically saying like they didn't want to take the traditional approach. They actually work with a lot of the kind of gaming influencers, and they almost become the fans.
Well, here's a question then.
Yes.
How does this relate back to something like movie magazines, which had this, or even music, which had the same sort of review job?
Mm-hmm.
Do games magazines not just need to change to be the way the music and movie magazines change?
Josh is talking about building a community around that. And I think Empire in particular has done a really good job about making it about your fraternity of film fans. Yeah. Whereas in the past, the games journalists were acting very much as gatekeepers. And in gaming as well, there is still, as a result of that, this antipathy towards game journalists. The meme is games journalists cannot play games. They are bad at games because they are first and foremost journalists and not gamers. That's really conversation
funny. Because I met Mark Alka from Single Track, the mountain bike magazine, at the publishing show this week. And he was saying about how mountain bike journalists used to get a lot of shit from the mountain bikers because they weren't good enough mountain bikers. Okay, so I don't know how many minutes we are into this podcast, but we haven't mentioned AI yet.
30, almost exactly 30 minutes.
There was a headline this week in The Guardian on Wednesday. German publisher Axel Springer says journalists could be replaced by AI. Fuck me.
Now, Peter, is that what Axel Springer said?
I don't think it was. So basically, Matthias Döpfner, the CEO from Axel Springer, he sent an internal memo that said that, yes, journalists are at risk of being placed by artificial intelligence systems like ChatGPT, but he moved that very quickly onto admin roles, talking about, exactly what we know AI does well, processing shitloads of data, going through stuff that no human in their right mind wants to go through anyway. And the real headline in the story was that he said, the guy who's responsible for that headline, but if you take it at face value, what Matthias Döpfner said was, only those who create the best original content will survive. And he's 150 billion% right on that. But that headline is like, oh God, the robots are coming. It's like, guys, get a clue. We know that what bleeds leads, but Jesus wept.
Talking of AI, mine's about AI too, I'm afraid. No, it's very similar, actually. It's certainly related. So Wired has published a piece this week setting out guidelines for how they will and won't use generative AI tools. They've sort of done a long post explaining that they're not going to publish stories with text generated by AI because they think that the current tools are prone to errors and bias. Mm-hmm. Not unlike humans, but often produce dull, unoriginal writing.
That's true.
That's a better point, actually.
Yeah.
They are exploring AI to suggest headlines and story ideas and as an analytical tool.
Yeah, I'm not buying that, though, because that's Guardian. The headline could have been written by AI.
Like I said, this is all connected this week. So all the details aside, I did actually think that the way that Wired had published this piece, it was actually a really good example of the sort of transparency I think other publishers should be considering if they're looking at AI reporting or generative AI at all. Because it was a really good way of sort of saying to the audience, like, look, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. this is, and it was also a bit of an idiot's guide. It sort of explains a lot of the context and the jargon, like what is some of this stuff, what is generative AI. I don't want to say idiot friendly, but definitely idiot friendly.
Right, I'll read it then.
Excellent. Get it bookmarked. So we spoke a lot about trust this week, and in my conversation with Edward Felsenthal, it was front and centre of the editor-in-chief and CEO at Times' reason for why his magazine has made it to 100 years old. We spoke about the secret sauce that got the publication to its centenary, when so many other magazines have fallen by the wayside. We spoke about innovation and transformation versus trust and legacy. But first, I asked Edward what it felt like to be in charge of a 100-year-old publishing brand.
It's pretty special. And I think what's been incredible to me, so I've been here just about 10 years, so a tenth of our history. And, you know, as we've hired people, as I talk to our consumers and customers around the world, everybody feels some connection to this brand, you know, and so many people have a time story. There's some point in their life or their family history, or you know, where they have a connection, a real connection with the brand, and everywhere you go in the world, people know it and it means something to them, and that's special to all of us who work here. I think it's a big part of what makes our work as a brand and as a team possible, and a big part of why we've made it to 100.
I think that's the other thing, is that there is that again, there's not many brands that are 100 years old, but there's actually not many brands that are quite so well known in publishing. You know, I can maybe think of half a dozen.
Yeah, I think what's unusual about Time is, you know, we're not coastal in the US. We have audience really all across the country and across ideological lines, which is increasingly unusual. And then we're truly global. And there aren't many publications, as you say, that are that well known and that are truly global in a way that this one is. So, you know, we'll interview, you know, I think about even the world leaders we've interviewed in the last 4 years, and you know, it's Olaf Scholz and it's Macron, but also Biden and Harris and Trump, and you know, we're in Ukraine one day and in the Philippines another.
So what's the secret? What's allowed Time to become that global brand and reach 100 years old?
Well, I think the main secret is trust, which is so valuable and increasingly rare in our world. We've got 100 years of it that nobody can replicate. There was a period in our business, the media business, where the word legacy, as in legacy media, almost became a bad word, and everybody, we all in a way thought the future are these, you know, digital startups that were just getting off the ground, you know, 10, 15 years ago. I helped start one of them, the Daily Beast, before I came here. And I think part of what we've seen in recent years is that legacy is not a bad word. It's a good word. It's a positive. And of course, there's plenty of room for exciting, innovative, new players. Time emerged as an innovator in 1923. It was the upstart of its day, and there, as I say, plenty of room for that. But I think we're seeing the value of legacy media players, because legacy, in many cases, and I think certainly in our case, means trust, and trust is valuable and rare. So I think and I think one of the things that's really special about Time and editing Time is that we see that trust extends not just around what to know, around what's happening in the world, but also around what to do. And, you know, people are looking for, we see this in our audience patterns, guidance. guidance around events and global news, but also guidance about should I take Paxlovid when I get COVID, and how do I take care of my student loans, and really in some of the most personal, health has become as big a topic as we have, because we have this trust, and people in a time of where there's so much health information out there, nobody really quite knows who to turn to. The name time means something to people. So that's, I think, a big part of the sauce, the special sauce.
Do you think that idea of actionable information is going to become more and more important?
I absolutely do. And some of that's the brand that prompts people to be willing to take action on what they learn from time, the guidance they receive from time. But of course, some of that is our team. And we have, again, just to stay on health for a moment, we have some extraordinarily experienced writers who've been covering this space for decades, know it as well as anybody in the field, and so that's really valuable.
If I think on it, you've been there since what, 2013?
Yes.
Even before Mark Benioff took over or bought the title, you must have seen some huge changes at Time.
Absolutely. I think at some level, change is a tradition at Time. As I said, it was the innovator in the space. When it was founded, Time won an Oscar for short films it did called The March of Time in the 30s. HBO grew out of Time Inc. There's been, tremendous innovation in how we connect with audiences throughout, and that was obviously happening. It's accelerated very much with our new owners, our current owners, because they are such incredible supporters and believers in the brand and what it can do. And there was a period when, in our corporate ownership, we were cutting our way through the changes in the industry, which, as so many media publications have, and they've invested in the brand and enabled us to build out entire new divisions. But as you say, that innovation, you can't be in our business without evolving constantly. I don't think there's any industry that's in the state of certainly no industry that's in a greater state of disruption than ours, constant disruption. And so, it's definitely evolution all the time.
So before you new owners, what kind of, you talk about legacy? What was it like taking that on when you joined Time? That's a big that's a big call to get, right?
Well, it was. I spent the first half of my career at the Wall Street Journal, 15 years, and I was very much involved in evolution at the Journal as we looked to expand our content areas and how we delivered our content. And then I went and did a startup, and then I was so excited to come back to Time because to come back into legacy media. I loved the startups I did, but there is something so meaningful about being part of helping a great institution like this one build on its past and move toward its future. And I was hired as the digital editor in 2013. At the time, print and digital were pretty much totally separate at Time. Digital was kind of the backwater. And so a lot of what I did in my first years here was bring print and digital together, bring the brand into one digital facing presence. And that was exciting because suddenly we had the biggest audience in our history. Print at its peak was, I don't know, 5.5 million or something. Today we got 105 million people around the world who are not even including our studios division, who are our global audience. So it was and continues to be really an exciting journey.
So recently, your new ownership, has that meant a big changes to you? That that idea of cutting to success in the past, is that gone for you?
I think it's part of evolution. we're growing in some areas and we're shrinking in others.
Mm.
But overall, we're growing. And, as the industry changes, as the mediums change, we're doing less in some areas and more in others. Our fastest growing division today, our fastest growing business today by far is our Time Studios division, which is mostly nonfiction and documentaries. We're also doing some scripted work, and it's about 25% of our revenue today. It didn't exist 3 years ago. We also have, back to health, we talked about health, a business called Time Health, which is a publication that goes into doctors' offices and is focused on specific conditions. So you're in the doctor's office and you're at the cardiologist, and there's a Time Health guide to heart health in front of you. And that's also a very fast growing business for us. Digital, obviously, a huge area of focus for us. Print, we have a great magazine. We love our magazine, but it's fewer and fewer people are consuming information in print. We're going to be in print for a long time, delivering it to people who want that format, but the other areas are where the growth is and where we're expanding.
You're also looking at e-commerce?
We are. We've been in the e-commerce space actually almost as long as I've been here. We did. There was an initiative across every brand at our former parent company, Time Inc. That was 24 brands, from Southern Living to Real Simple, Fortunes, Sports Illustrated, Time, and we were in e-commerce then, and through a couple of different partnerships. The most recent one with Taboola, we are expanding that as well. And I think it gets back to what you and I were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, time and the trust that people have in time. We're going to tell you everything you need to know about the headlines, but we're also going to help guide you through what to do in your personal life, with your health, with your finances, with your purchases. And I did this at the Wall Street Journal as well when I launched Personal Journal, which was, we called it Business and the Business of Life, and expanded the reach of the journal from a kind of business to business audience to a consumer audience in addition to the business audience. And that's very much what we're doing here with e-commerce and much else.
If you tie all these things together, I guess the one thing that is common across all these different initiatives is just the audience, right? It's people that want trustable information, they want actionable information, they want solutions. Is that the way you sat at the center of all this, trying to figure out what's going to work? Is that part of it?
That's very much part of it. Very much part of it. I think we are at the center of a kind of, in the mix in a powerful way, in a vast, expanding, complex information ecosystem. And we are many things. We're news, yes, but and this goes back 100 years. We're information, and I think part of the power of you asked about secret sauce and trust, we talked about, but there are two other key parts to it. One is, there are a lot of publications that are specifically about business, or specifically about health, or specifically about entertainment and Hollywood. We are about everything. We are a guide. We're a trusted guide to the world around us and to events as they unfold. And I think that's, we do these incredible events now. We talked about the studios business. We talked about Time Health. We haven't talked about our global events. When we were at Time Inc., we did kind of one event a year, our Time 100 Gala today. And this is really an area where our owners have encouraged us to grow and expand. We do events all over the world. We were just in Dubai. We were in Singapore in the fall. We'll be in Israel in the spring. We were at Davos. We'll be in LA on March 8th for our Women of the Year event. But I think what's particularly special about our events is that we bring together people from across the globe and from across fields. There are lots of events where the actors are all together, or events where the athletes are all together, or the business people are all together. Our events, because of the nature of our brand, bring together athletes and astronauts and activists and scientists and political leaders and business leaders, and they have the opportunity to share learnings, to forge, because every problem today is multi-dimensional, multi-sector, and so I think that's also part of our special sauce, that we have credibility in all the key areas of humanity, and then we have the power to bring those people together. The other thing is people. And I think Time, Henry Luce, who was the co-founder of Time, used to say, Time didn't invent personality journalism, the Bible did. The idea being that people are what shape the world and who shape history. And if you look at the cover of Time starting in 1923, it was really not until the 60s when you saw covers that weren't an image of a person or a group of people. And today, still, we think of ourselves as telling the story of the world through the people who shape the world. It's about people. It's about the possibilities that individuals contain and the influence that individuals can have on the world. So I think all of that is part of what's that mix that's gotten us where we are. The ultimate form of that is the Person of the Year franchise, which is 95 years old and is a major global event still today.
It gets some attention, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, and it's, for us at Time, it's exciting. It's a major event, but it's also, as journalists, it's this prism, this framework for us to look back at the year and who shaped it, who made it what it was. Who are the people who shaped it, the influence that they exerted.
Yeah, I guess it's pretty central to just what you've been saying. It's that what you cover and what you talk about is led by people. So finding the Person of the Year is absolutely logical in that.
Yeah, and it's what we do every day, but it's the Person of the Year is sort of the biggest expression of that daily movement.
You mentioned your covers. Personally, I love your covers. A Time cover is an amazing thing. One of the things I'm really interested in is the kind of change there from print to digital, and how those covers now are just still, they work so well online. Was that a very deliberate process, or did it just happen?
Very much so. I think of the cover today as a digital object. Obviously, it's beautiful and powerful in print, and we have 1.4 million people around the world who have it delivered, the magazine with a cover delivered to their homes. But it really is a digital object, and it is exhilarating, when we are on the right topic at the right moment, to see how it travels the globe. Digitally, I think about, we did a Serena Williams cover this summer when she retired, just traveled so powerfully around the world. We've done a couple of Ukraine covers. We worked with the artist JR to do something about the resilience of Ukraine, incredible image that traveled the globe, and another, quoting a speech of Zelensky's early in the conflict, and just amazing to see the impact it has digitally. I agree with you.
I think for me, the defining aspect of the Trump era has got to be Time's covers.
Yeah, well, and it was our creative director D.W. Pine is the expert in this. I
think it's just
a subject, but
absolutely nailed it every time.
But I think it was Trump rewrote the rules of the presidency, and DW and his team rewrote the rules of the Time cover. Although Trump is not the most frequent presence on the cover in terms of U.S. presidents. Nixon.
Oh, really?
Nixon still holds the record. If you're into cover trivia.
I did not know that. I've got one other question just to ask you. If we can go back to Benioff's, would you advise any magazine publisher to find themselves a rich benefactor? Do you think that has made a huge difference to what you can do?
I think there are a lot of models today. The old model, well, in truth, you look at media moguls through history and whether it's Hearst or Pulitzer, that's always been present. But, we are, as we discussed, a business and industry and extraordinary transformation. And I think the hardest model today, because of that, is being part of a public company that operates on a quarter-to-quarter basis, which, we were at Time Inc., Time Warner, at AOL Time Warner before my time. And I think what you're seeing now is that this is a business that to succeed requires patience, experimentation, investment. And so part of that is the trend of individual owners with the means to be patient and the means to invest. But there are also amazing other models. I'm on the board of the Daily Memphian, my hometown, a fantastic nonprofit that is both philanthropically and subscriber supported, and a different model. The ProPublica, founded by my longtime boss and mentor, Paul Steiger, a nonprofit model. The Texas Tribune here in the U.S., incredibly successful. So I think we're in a period of experimentation, and that'll continue for a while.
I'm not going to ask you about the next 100 years, but are you confident for maybe the next 10 years?
I think I have absolutely no doubt that somebody will be celebrating the 200th anniversary of Time. It won't be me, but I feel really, really good. Time will look different in 2033 than it does today, but it looks very different than it did when I started in 2013. I think in some ways it's changed more in the last 10 years than in the previous 50.
Absolutely.
And I imagine that will accelerate.
Fantastic. We always close by asking our guests for a media recommendation, something that you've enjoyed. What would you recommend to our listeners?
Well, since your last question was future-oriented, I'll recommend something future-oriented, which is that my colleague, Simon Schuster, who, born in Russia, grew up in the U.S., has been covering Ukraine and the region, since 2014, and elsewhere before that, has probably spent more time with Zelensky than certainly any U.S. journalist. He wrote our Person of the Year package and has led our coverage of this world crisis. And he's written a book about Zelensky, a biography of Zelensky, and I've read parts of it, and it's outstanding, and he's outstanding. And so it's a pre-order, but it'll be a great read.
It's a proper inside track recommendation.
It's an inside track recommendation.
If you are a publisher with a newsletter, you should consider entering our Publisher Newsletter Awards. It's our first year doing them, and they are now open for entries. You can go and get your entry pack at publishernewsletters.com.
And while you're visiting websites, go to voices.media, where you can find a link to our Ko-Fi page. We really do appreciate it if you kick in any money to help support the podcast, the newsletter. And speaking of the newsletter, we condense all the news of the previous day into 4 bite-sized chunks so you can start the day afresh with everything you need to know about media.
But for this week, that's it. This probably wasn't a typical episode of the Media Voices podcast. We don't generally talk about
politics.
Despite
politics and
despite what it sounds like, we do typically try to steer away from it.
We do. We try and focus on things that make you better at your job, not things that make you
your
mad. Soul to leave your body. So next week we will be back with some much more practical conversation. Promise.
It depends what Matt Hancock said this week.
That's true.
But until then, thank you very much for listening, and bye-bye.